Hello, everybody. I'm Jon Stoessl. I'm the head of neurology at UBC, and I'm the co-chair of the Scientific Planning Committee for the Vancouver Congress. I'm here at the 21st International Parkinson's and Movement Disorders Society meeting with Dr. Patrick McGeer, who is one of the major contributors to research in movement disorders and whom I have known for more than 30 years now. So welcome and thank you for coming, Pat. So maybe we could just begin by telling me about your early years and your education.
I was interested in basketball when I went to UBC, and I did chemistry because it was easy. Well, we had a good basketball team. We beat the Harlem Globetrotters, and if you look at me now, how could the guy this little ever play that game? But people have grown. They're taller now than they used to be. I'm not sure why, but the Knights of the Round Table, if you look at the armor, we're little guys, and
That's right,
people are growing. Same genes, they're growing taller. Could be the diet. It could be elimination of a lot of childhood diseases, which may stunt growth. It might be both. Other things we don't yet know, but people are growing taller.
I don't quite know what my excuse will be, but I was aware of your rather distinguished history in basketball, and I think you've been a little bit modest in describing it. So you studied chemistry, and how did that get you into the brain and into neuroscience?
Well, there was no medical school here, so I went on to Princeton to take my PhD. And that's where I learned about science. It was an awesome place. Einstein was there.
Yes, of course.
He used to come and watch us play touch football. And Smythe was there, and all of the people who had known about atomic energy and the change in industry. And I was just overwhelmed by all of this. And that's when I became a committed scientist.
But that was in chemistry.
That was in chemistry, and then I went on to DuPont because DuPont was then hiring half of all PhDs in chemistry, saying that their growth was limited not by anything else but how many PhDs there were. So I went to work for DuPont in Wilmington. My supervisor was a guy named Al Gore. We worked on plastics, and Al thought it might be good to have fibers out of this. And they said, well, if you want to have fibers, go somewhere else. He started Gore-Tex.
I remember that as well, actually, but something else happened to you at DuPont. I think you met somebody else, didn't you?
My luckiest day. That's when I met Edie, who is my mentor and much better half.
And many people would agree with you on that. And that, of course, became a partnership that lasted for how many years now?
Well, we were married in '54, so we're still going strong. We go to work every day. No, it's not work, it's play. But we're doing science every day because it's fun.
And it has been extraordinarily productive. Now, when in all of this did you go to medical school?
I came back to medical school because I really didn't want to be an executive in industry, and I had always wanted to go to medical school, and UBC started a medical school. And of all things, my wife's father was the first port doctor in Vancouver. He was on his way back when he met another famous doctor in New York and married this lovely lady, and they had a daughter, Edie. So Edie completed the trip.
So I actually didn't. So you went to medical school at UBC, and were you in the first class, or?
I was in the fourth class. And it was a marvelous opportunity because there were so many patients available, and so few medical students to interview them all. So it was a wonderful opportunity to learn, and I just indulged myself going around interviewing cases in all of the hospitals. And they were glad to see medical students because there were so few.
Of course. Now, did you ever practice medicine in a practice setting, or was it always in terms of research?
It was really always in terms of research, though I was on the staff of a number of hospitals, and I used, of all things, to be a consultant for the specialists because I was up on the literature, but I never had a routine practice, no.
So you had a background in chemistry, and how did you shift from chemistry to neurochemistry, which was probably not even an identified field at that time?
Well, an investigator just follows his nose. And we had been looking at Alzheimer's disease because it was such a common disorder, and we were getting many brains of patients who died from Alzheimer's disease. We saw that there was an inflammatory component, and so we speculated that Alzheimer's disease was an inflammatory disorder. We looked for a marker in the brain, and it turned out to be HLA-DR, which people said, no, that can't be in the brain, and that's why it was dismissed as a crazy hypothesis. But neuroinflammation is now the largest field of brain research. There are departments of neuroinflammation, professors of neuroinflammation, yes. So that it just took off.
Well, in fact, as I mentioned before we started, one of your slides was shown at the opening of a talk at the plenary sessions this morning. That was related to Parkinson's, and I think it was not so easy, in fact, to demonstrate microglial activation in the brain at that time, correct? When you first did this?
Nobody had done it. We just got a hold of an antibody against an inflammatory marker, and there it was, showing the active microglia attacking neurons and attacking neurites and so on, so that the immunohistochemical evidence was irrefutable.
Now, the Parkinson's paper I remember well, and is in fact I still have some papers that are actually on paper, and that one is of course in my files. That was published, I think, in Neurology in 1988. When did you first demonstrate inflammation in Alzheimer's brain?
Oh, this would have been in 1986 or 88. But prior to that, the hints had all been there. And we initially did cell counts in Parkinson's disease, and were able to show that people lost about 3/4 of all of their substantia nigra neurons before they began to show any signs of deficit. Now, this is becoming extremely important because it shows that you have a tremendous reserve, and we think now that simply taking anti-inflammatories will protect people against Parkinson's disease.
Right, and in fact this contributed to your careful hunt for inflammatory cells in postmortem brain, the observation that people taking anti-inflammatory agents had a lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And I think that was dismissed as pure psychosis by the majority of the medical community. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, look, if there's some kind of a breakthrough, if there's a paradigm shift, count on it being rejected as ridiculous and stupid and blocked. So that this is nothing new. It's nothing special to us. This is just part of the course. So there are two kinds of people. There are the authorities and there are the experts. Be an expert. My deputy, when I was minister in Victoria, said you can always tell an authority by how long they can hold up progress in their own field. So experts, of course, can morph into authorities, but the true expert is the one who keeps up to the literature and has a flexible and adaptive mind, because as new discoveries are made, everything you knew 5 years ago is irrelevant now. You have to have a new set of principles to work by.
Well, I guess we should all take pride in being rejected then. Now, but prior to your interest in neuroinflammation, you, of course, you and Edie were very well known for your neurochemical studies, for mapping neurochemical pathways, neurochemical anatomy. And I'm not sure that everyone who's going to be watching this realizes that you were very early into the levodopa story in Parkinson's. Do you?
That's correct. So at the time we started doing brain research, it was believed there were no neurotransmitters in the nervous system, that it all had to be electrical. Then along came Arvid Carlson, who noticed when he gave reserpine, which depleted the catecholamines, people developed Parkinson's disease. And he could restore that function simply by giving L-DOPA. He got the Nobel Prize for that, but only 40 years later. But that was the opening bell, really, for Parkinson's disease and neuroinflammation. And then along came Kotzius in 1967, who showed it worked by giving L-DOPA and showing that it was an effective treatment. And really there hasn't been any major advances in treatment since then. The introduction of L-DOPA, it's been a marvelous way of treating patients, but more will come when we can find ways of blocking the disease advance, because L-DOPA doesn't block the advance of the disease, it merely slows it down.
No, of course, but it has been a spectacular breakthrough.
It was a spectacular breakthrough, but what we need now, and which I don't think is far away, is a treatment that will block Parkinson's disease.
Can you tell us a little bit about any role models and heroes you've had during your career?
Well, Bill Gibson is one. Bill Gibson is one because he was started a neurological disease department at UBC. He spotted us, Edie and me, recruited us into brain research, and then took us all around the world to meet who were the leaders everywhere. So he was somebody, knew where the forefront was, got us to the forefront, and then once you're at the forefront, then every advance you make is outside of the box. So Bill Gibson was another, and of course our other great hero was Jack Eccles, who won a Nobel Prize. We wrote a textbook together and had some important contributions jointly to make. So those are the two, but Bill Gibson was one of the greatest recruiters at UBC. Everybody he recruited became an officer of the Order of Canada, and the only one who didn't was Bill Gibson.
Did he not?
He became a member very late.
Okay.
But everybody he recruited became an officer. He was really a great recruiter and faculty member and contributor.
And I remember Bill well, of course, and he lived to a good age, and my recollection is that till the very last, he was always enthusiastic, always had an open mind, and always wanted to encourage young, new people.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He was an inspirer.
Yeah, a remarkable feat, really. I think we've already talked, probably, I'm assuming, but maybe I shouldn't, what you feel is your own most significant contribution to the field.
Well, that's others for to say. Neuroinflammation is an obvious thing because that's already there. But it isn't what you do, it's what your followers do that really determine the significance. There are a couple that I will mention that I think will have impact. One is our discovery of a complement inhibitor, and people don't really know about their complement is their greatest friend. But when it doesn't distinguish friend from foe, and instead of becoming your friend, becomes your foe, that's when over 20 diseases are started. So what got us onto this was when we were in Japan, people discovered that some individuals couldn't make C9, so they couldn't make the membrane attack complex of complement. So I said, who are they? And they said, well, we don't know. Why don't you know? Because they never come to hospital. So this is a lesson. Your good genes you can't find out about because you never get sick from them. So we said, we want to put us Caucasians and others on the same level as those lucky Japanese who never come to hospital. So we screened 10,000 compounds. We came up with this material, orin tricarboxylic acid, which we've now brought along. It's just finishing its compulsory safety studies. It'll be in the clinic later this year, and it should block Parkinson's disease. We'll see.
I wasn't aware of that, actually. What have been some of the greater scientific challenges that you have encountered over the years?
Well, I suppose every investigator, they just follow their curiosity. But of course, each time you take a step outside of the box, you're going to be frustrated, you're going to be held back, you're going to have your support cut off. so these are frustrations. But you see, for the investigator, it's not me. Any investigator for centuries will tell you the same thing. You're driven by curiosity. So you get up in the morning and you got to find the answer to that. That overcomes. You see these minor blocks. Just anticipate them.
That leads very well into the next question, actually, is what advice do you have for young physicians and scientists entering the field of neuroscience in general and Parkinson's more specifically?
Well, for the physician, I think the important thing is to keep up with the literature, and it's faster and faster and perhaps hard to do. But there's a recent paper has come out saying the third leading cause of death is physician mistakes. So that's not something to be overlooked, and the practicing doctor needs to be sure that they're flexible and they're keeping up with the latest advances. It can be done through the web so that you don't have to keep going to these exotic trips and get lectures from other doctors on a trip to South America. That's not the way to keep up. The way to keep up is just consult the web, because the web is up to date. Wikipedia is usually up to date. So that's for the practicing physician. For the investigator, if you're driven by curiosity, you don't need any advice from me or anybody else. If you're not driven by curiosity, go drive a taxi, because you're not going to make important contributions. Curiosity is the driving force.
Absolutely. Would you do anything differently if you were able to turn the clock back 20 years?
Not one thing.
Spoken with true confidence.
No, it's not that. It's that, look, I'm going to follow my nose. Just like a dog does going down the street, you follow a trail. And if the trail is there, you follow it. So it's not that I had to make any difficult decisions. Just, there's the evidence. There's one thing I always tell my people. Never believe your theory always believe your data. So
Of course, yeah.
if you accept your data and you follow your data, then you're going to do useful things. If you are trying to prove your theory and you twist your data around, you're going to publish papers that are an embarrassment.
Yeah. Very true. Now, I'm not sure I've ever met people who work as hard as you and Edie, but nonetheless, can you comment on achieving or maintaining a work-life balance?
No, it's fun. We don't do it because it's work. If you did something else, it would be boring. Everything else is boring in comparison.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. How many years were you in politics?
Oh, I was there for 24 years. I did my duty, but they were very helpful to me. We wrote 150 papers and the textbook with Eccles while I was in the cabinet. The premier was very helpful. He'd see me working at the cabinet meeting, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Pat. If there's anything involved for you, I'll tell you." So the premiers were really very good to me. So that made it possible that I didn't have to give up my day job.
Well, in fact, you were a cabinet minister when I first met you, I think, and you continued to, you were still more productive in science than most people who were working supposedly full-time at it. What motivated you to get into politics?
Well, I was part of the Alumni Association at UBC, and I was just counting up the number of people in grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, how many people were going to arrive wanting a post-secondary education. There's nothing there for them. Wait a second, what are all these people going to do when they graduate if they get into post-secondary education and there's nothing for them? So that's what said, look, I've got to get in there and try and do something about this. So that's really what started me off. And eventually, when I was minister, I was able to start 7 new post-secondary institutes and provide the variety that we need.
So what is your advice on that today? Because, of course, it's a bit of a hot topic, that a lot of people are getting educated. It's not clear that there will be jobs for them, and what sorts of things they do. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I'm a great admirer of BCIT because they look at the market and they prepare people for jobs that are needed. And about a third of the people who enroll as undergraduates at BCIT have got a BA from UBC. Now, that isn't the people who take physics, chemistry, computer science, and so on, but some of the other areas, the arts areas that don't lead directly to jobs, well, these people need to go to a place like BCIT, and they do, and it works.
Just for the people watching, this is the British Columbia Institute of Technology.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I should have.
But I suppose there are people out there who are very entrepreneurial and will find new areas if there isn't a job that exists in their own area.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We need more of that.
Now, I know you are an honorary member of the Movement Disorder Society. Has the Movement Disorder Society had much impact on your professional life, or do you have advice for the society or the members of the society?
I think the society has done a great job. They have an outstanding journal. I'm having a little fight with them now to get one of my papers published there because it's...
We all do.
But no, I just want to congratulate the Movement Disorder Society. Wish there were more like it because it's they put on great meetings and have an outstanding journal.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. Last question, which we've touched on a little bit, but in case you want to expand, did you experience any biases or barriers during your career development? And do you think that younger colleagues today face similar or different challenges?
I suppose for the young investigator, getting the first opportunity in an academic institution or in a appropriate industrial spot is the anxiety-producing and difficult step for them, and we can only hope that the successes are so great that the opportunities expand, and that requires wise leadership on the part of academic leaders and industrial leaders, and too often they don't think in terms of the need to bring in new talent that is committed to finding their objectives obsolete. So the new young people should be there to destroy the ethic of the existing people and their leaders. That's how you produce progress. And if you try and inhibit that, then you're not going to flourish as well as the other organizations that embrace it.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, although I said it was my last question, you've triggered another one, which is you've worked in both sides. You've worked in industry many years ago and for many years in the academic environment. Those were historically seen as separate and each regarded the other with a certain degree of suspicion, I imagine, which is probably still the case today. But can you comment on the lessons that the academic institutions can learn from industry?
Well, learn to cooperate with industry because they can be your best friends, but it requires an understanding of what's good about the industrial group. And industries, companies go through waves, because if they get a bad leader, they're going to sink and stay down until they get a good leader to have them rise up again. So I worked for DuPont in its great days. It's come on difficult times since. Same is true of big companies like General Electric. So the astute people in academia are the ones that can take advantage of the best in industry to make their academic opportunities flourish.
Are there things you think industry in general does better than the academic environment?
No, not really, because it's the same people reaching the same goals. Of course, industry's idea is to make a dollar, and one of the great difficulties in American industry is they get a Harvard business graduate who are committed to the next quarterly statement and really don't look down the road a bit. It wasn't that way when I worked for DuPont, for example, and I have great admiration for the old days at DuPont, not so much now.
Well, but long-term vision is important for both, yes. And not so easily accomplished. Are there other questions you would like to ask or comments you would like to make?
Not really. I'm very flattered to be interviewed, and I hope some of the experiences I've had might be a benefit to young people coming along.
Well, I'm sure they will.
The torch goes to you. Carry it high.
Well, thank you very much for coming in today and for speaking with me.